Welcome to another day in the corporate matrix, everybody. We are so excited today to have James True on our episode of Corporate Escape Artists. We've known James through his YouTube channel and his books. So if you're seeing some of the visuals, you'll see some of James's books. And he is a phenomenal philosopher, writer, and in my opinion, one of the biggest and most influential thinkers of anyone else I've listened to. So in the whole space on YouTube and elsewhere, people that are thinking big about what's going on in the world, what's coming and where we are. Honestly, I've learned more from you, James, about how to increase the way that I think about things. You like to say how to open your aperture and render more of reality. And truly, I have learned this from James. So I'm really excited for all of you to get to know him. He really does stretch the way all of us think about things. And I think, James, you're probably one of the most underrated YouTube personalities and thinkers out there. So I love introducing people to you and getting more people to engage with your work. So welcome to the podcast. Really excited you're here.
Oh, absolute pleasure to be here. The feeling is mutual, and congratulations on the new venture. So I look forward to watching you guys grow too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, James. So, James, could you just fill in some of the blanks about yourself that Thaddeus perhaps missed or doesn't know?
Um, well, I guess maybe I'm more want to talk to the listener, maybe who doesn't know anything. Maybe I'll start with there. I'm been tried to be a normal person as best I can. I have no felons. There's nothing tragically wrong that I've done with the world, but I've definitely lived a path where people seem to be a little bit upset when I have something to say. This has been a trait of mine since I was 5, and it's led me into studying philosophy and religion simply as a coping mechanism in college to just try and fathom why I just felt so 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 opinionated, I guess we'll say that. And carving my thought process through pre-law and a little bit of poli-sci that turned into a career as a cartoonist, a political cartoonist, which later turned into a career in just the newspaper industry itself, more on the visual graphics end, never any written or editorial end. All those things led me into programming, self-taught, just computer programmer, just did that more for a economic way of surviving in the world. And that led me into some pretty big doors, including Stanford University and Wired Magazine and just a few other places that uh, kind of showed me some avenues that just kept allowing me to grow further. All of that stuff finally culminated into me writing my first book about 5 years ago, and I just published my 7th book 2 days ago. I feel that I'm not actually capable of surviving as a what I used to do in the corporate world simply because my philosophy and mindset is just a little bit so different that I end up kind of becoming dangerous. I don't wear this in a prideful way. I don't consider it a cutting, juddy, cool thing about my personality. I find it very annoying and very distracting to the overall goal I have, which is just simply connecting to people but more importantly, not lying to myself about the world that we're living in. And that I've just noticed that those two things can sometimes really grab each other's throat and stop us, I think, from understanding what's happening to us and where we're at and why we're here. So all of these things have been uh, a result of the environment reacting to me, reacting to them. None of this has been a destiny of mine. None of the things that I've done have been, I'm profoundly going to do this. It's more of just been, where am I causing the least amount of trouble? But where am I also finding the most enrichment for my own personal being, whether that be, financially or spiritually and things like that. So,
Hmm. So, I mean, it sounds like, James, you did some work as a computer programmer and elsewhere in the corporate world. So at one point you were there, didn't work out for you because of the philosophy that you just shared. So what would be a story that you could relate from that experience
yeah.
that kind of like encapsulates what it was you experienced?
So most of my the ad agency turned into the software agency. Those two fields are very similar. And as a graphic artist, as someone who turned from political cartooning into graphic arts more as a career, I started to notice how corporate logos and corporate media utilized PR and just understood the technology of it, the visage of colors, the tone of of this blue, the edge of this paper, the things like that had such a tangible importance. One of the things that I was paid to do was to create, I'll use the word stunning, not as a reflection on me, but what they expected, stunning visual augmented reality presentations for corporate atmospheres that would just blow people away, would dilate them. These are typically people that work within a large corporate structure, corporations such as EMC, just one of many that has like maybe 50,000 employees worldwide, and they come to a place, say Barcelona or Las Vegas or some large city, and have a religious ceremony. I really mean this, a psychological religious ceremony where the key words are handed down by the high priest, not necessarily the CEO, but usually the CEO, someone like that. And if people are listening to me may not be familiar with me, this is not a ridicule statement. I'm not calling them a high priest in like an insulting way. I'm trying to explain to you how I think about things, and that there's a plasma that's being distributed in the corporate atmosphere. And it was my job to create that gunpowder, to create that dilation. And I did quite well. It was a wonderful job, at least over probably 2 decades. And the entire time I was living in the backwoods of Tennessee and North Carolina, but all my clients were in California. And it was really just the best of both worlds. I was separate from that world. I never was really fully immersed in it, but I had enough technical expertise simply because I was interested in the technology more than anyone else was. And it gave me that advantage. So it was sort of like, we have to use the three-eyed giant to see the future, but we don't want anyone to know that we're that we're secretly consulting, right? This crazy guy that lives outside of our village. And so that was my role, and I was fine with it. I actually enjoyed it. So when I'm in Barcelona, and we're doing a presentation there, there's a team of 5 of us, and the 5 of us are invited out to have dinner with the vice president of Boeing. And I'm more trying to tell you how they saw this. A lot of big names that they could appeal to get more clientele to book them to create these things. One example is, we had a model of a plane, but if you held up my app that we made, it would show you what's inside the plane. And so you being there could, move your app around. And back then, this was like, oh my God, this is the big, I mean, people were just drooling over this stuff. So it was a cleric. I had a magic that other people didn't have. And so that magic required them to utilize me, but they had to use really big kid gloves. And one of the ways they did that was during the celebratory experience, where our our booth was considered just the hottest thing ever. And during all this networking, I was, as politely as they could tell me, told, you cannot you cannot come to dinner with us. You can't do that. And some of you may not be able to see me now, but I have no facial tattoos. I'm a pretty standard looking guy. I don't think I'm like a super good looking guy. I have a collar on. It has buttons. I understand how grooming works. I may not always get it right, but I mean, I'm just saying I do understand. And I'm not aware that I have any, no one's told me that I smell. Maybe I just haven't found the right person, but all these are more about fear. I feel like I'm dragging my feet. Sorry. I think a lot of it's fear. And it's like, why would we risk this wild card in the room? And over time, I began to find that insulting, because It was stopping the creative process. This is the only reason why I was pushed out of the corporate world, is because I wasn't allowed in the meetings where the big decisions were happening. Sometimes, I really mean sometimes, the wrong decision was made because I wasn't in the room, right? So it's like a solar company goes in and they talk to the office and everyone decides and everything's fine. And then just at the very end, just one person goes, "Well, yeah, but it's gonna be run on coal, right?" And everyone's like, "Oh, of course, sir." And it's like those kind of like really big monumental decisions that the ignorance, no one checks anyone except for me. And this is probably what pushed me out, I think, is it was more things like that, is that I would tend to step up more and say, "I'm sorry, but this solution is not, I don't like this solution because I don't think I'm going to be able to deliver to you the dilation that you expect because of this." And I think over time, I just became too much of an artist. And in the corporate atmosphere, at least the clients that I had, those C's changed. When a new company's starting out, you're going to be vital that you have to be cutting edge. And as you get those clients, it's going to be vital that you become conservative. So, in my opinion, I feel like I empathize with them more than they understand themselves. And that if they could have just maybe trusted me a little bit, we could have had just a few coaching sessions about, where I should not talk and things like that. But I just think that it just posed too much of a danger, because over the 10 years that they knew me, the latter 10 years, I went through a personal change, and the psychological vibration that I put out no longer fit inside of James is the freelance programmer who doesn't really talk a lot and just kind of blows us away and over an email. And so I could be just seeing it wrong, but ultimately that's what I think happened. No one's ever said you're out. But the moment I wrote my first book, not the first book, the moment I released Blueprints of Mind Control, that was gone. There was absolutely no freaking way that those people could associate with me. I was removed from the website as their lead. I was considered chief technical officer. I do not want to single out this company. This company I love these people. These people are great. I hope you understand that. These are beautiful. I still love them. I still think that they do great work and that they're at the cutting edge of what's necessary. And I get that I do not have the skills to survive on their team. It's a different atmosphere. And when you look at that, I believe you can compassionate and empathize the corporate world and see it as a living egregore, a living entity that has a psychology. And if you do not understand that psychology, or worse, if you do what I do, you do not accept that psychology, you are not going to make it there. You're not going to make it unless you cut off certain parts of you and grow them back when you get home. And that, I'm just selfish about that. My tentacles take a while, and I don't want to cut them off every single time it's 9 a.m. Monday through Friday. It's just tricky work, So I think we both push each other out.
So I think sometimes I have to remember I'm interviewing you and not just listening to you on the screen as you get going. And I do, for the people listening to this, or if you're listening to this right now, James, and if you're not familiar with James, you've used some words that people probably don't comprehend. So I would like to get into those. Maybe not this second, but I'm going to come back and have you define some of those that fit into
Sure.
the flow, just to make sure people can follow what it is you're saying, because you talk at a high enough level that people that aren't familiar with your work could get a little lost. And I really think that these terms you use are well worth knowing and learning about, especially for those still working in the corporate world. So one thing, James, that I've always heard, and as I've thought about, my own career, well, and then thinking about Heidi too, is like, she's unemployable, similar to what you've made yourself unemployable. And a lot of people we associate with nowadays have done the same thing.
Yeah.
For example, I work at a fairly high level in the corporation I currently work for. I've had really good experiences that can get me a job anywhere. So I would have headhunters calling me nonstop for jobs, for interviews, whatever it is. And I would say in the last 2 years, I've had zero of those calls. So I think I'm about working myself into the unemployable range here. And I'll be joining you all soon, would be my guess.
Godspeed.
Exactly. So it's an interesting thing what happens, and we have other
Yeah.
friends that have said very similar things. It's kind of interesting. But one of the things I've heard, James, is like as I was learning in the late 90s about the corporate world, so having come from a family that did not work in the corporate world at all and did not mentor me in my entry into the corporate world, I started learning these terms of like wage slavery. And I was like, well, there's no slavery. Like that's something that doesn't exist. And the longer that I stayed in the corporate world and the more I observed the people in the corporate world, it seems like this term wage slavery became more and more appropriate. Do you have any comments on the word wage slavery? And from some of your work that I've observed, like I've heard you say like sometimes people want to be told what to do. So do people want to be told what to do? And are we, a lot of us, wage slaves in the corporate world?
So people want to be told what to do, but only if they get to say that they don't want to be told what to do. And only if, when you tell them what to do, you do it in a way to where they don't feel as if they have to admit that they enjoy being told what to do. So it's really simple. Like
Sounds like
it's totally simple. Okay. I really mean that that's exactly what it is. And I think it's okay. The reason why we have a fetish against the word slavery right now, and I'm fine with it. I'm not here to make anyone change it, but I want people just to know why we have such a tricky, oh, it's slavery, and it has to be horrible, and it has to be the worst thing that ever happened. It has to be clearly a sign of oppression, and that there has to be a victim, and that there has to be a persecutor. And all these things are great. They're just giving you more spice. But below all these things, there is a trellis of slavery that all of us need to grow into independence and sovereignty and to exit the corporate world. And more importantly, I don't think that exiting the corporate world is even necessarily the end all or even the right solution for everyone. I believe that slavery is a fetish word we use to talk about the word symbiosis. I'm realizing that modern culture thinks fetish means sexual, so forgive me. I'm talking about the word fetish it's a word for a totem where someone expresses a psychological feeling about something. So a lucky rabbit's foot technically is a fetish. It's a spinner. One of those little spinners is a fetish. It's your car
Fidget
keys are
spinner.
a fetish. Yeah, thank you, fidget spinner. So anyway, so I just want to clarify that. But when you start to look at our true relationship, we have silk neckties because we're expressing this idea that we want to be under collar, but we don't want to admit that we're under collar, and that this is what it would look like when you're trying to ride the bicycle, but you're still using the training wheels. They embarrass you. When your friends come over, you're like, oh God, and you cover them with a blanket so they don't see that you're still on training wheels. It's the worst thing that could possibly happen for you. And that only occurred because you put in enough work with the training wheels to where you want so desperately for them to be gone. And that there was a point before when you were like, God, if I could just get training wheels. And that's called Rome. And that's called America. That's called colonialism. That's called blue collar work. That's called the military. That's called the Manhattan Project. That's all these large corporate programs are licensed slavery, but I don't mean in a slavery. I don't. I just mean in a here's how we create a serfdom The word serf is a term used for someone that's connected to the land. And if you buy a piece of land, it might come with a serf. This is legally true. And if you buy a plot of land that has a serf attached, you now own the root ball of that human being. And by owning the root ball, you would be considered negligent if you were to fail that root ball. Why? Because you're watching the organic plant of man leave the soil and grow autonomy to where he can actually wander around. So we're just wandering carrots. And as we emerge ourselves from the soil, we're going to have these processes where we start with no value. And at no value, we instantly start to learn the lowest decrepit levels of value. And I call this cannibalism. We literally just find the value of each other's flesh and we eat it. And by doing that, we're growing self-worth. This is actually progress. And if you follow this train far enough, the cannibalism leads to slave. But before slave, it's actually outlaw. So the cannibal tries to become an outlaw, and the outlaw is the one that's hunted by everyone in Rome. And if the outlaw does well enough, he might be able to become a slave. Now he's not an outlaw. He's legally allowed to exist somewhere because his value belongs to someone else. This is a training wheel for self-worth. So this person goes through slavery and then becomes, he earns his citizenship. He frees himself. Now he's a citizen of Rome. So he's a slave of Rome, but he's not a slave of this patriarch. This is a level up. He's leveling up. He gets so good at being a slave or a citizen, he becomes a master. And now he has his own slaves. But now he's responsible for every single thing they do. As the patriarch, he is sued. He's held liable for everything that his slaves happen. So it's a completely different form of slavery. It's all the same, but all these things are teaching us along the way, how much am I worth? How much am I worth? We used to be worth a thigh. Then we were worth the amount of cabbage that we could give to the landowner if he promises not to kill us and let us stay here. Then we are worth whatever it would cost to have our freedom and to buy our freedom back. Then it became, how much does Rome think that I owe them in taxes? All of these are giving you a number, and that number rises because your self-worth rises. And when you get in the corporate world, you're not competing for numbers, you're competing for commas. You've gotten so good at what you're doing that the numbers aren't good enough. You want a comma. You want to have 2 commas in your income every year. And if you have those commas, your self-worth is actualized and you feel the power of 2 commas. All of these are the trellis of slavery, right? Each rung is raising us higher. So to me, all of it's working. All of it is perfect because we keep seeing upward mobility. As long as I keep seeing upward mobility, I am completely down with slavery. Like, I'm completely thumbs up with slavery. Sorry, that's such a long answer, but it's just so important to define how I look at slavery to understand that.
So the way that people, I guess, marry themselves to the organization in return for some sort of protection or some sort of perceived upward mobility puts them in a position of what we would think of as slavery. You're going to be told what to do, where to do it, how to do it, when to do it, what to wear when you show up, but you're going to provide for your own food, transportation, and housing based on the money we give you, and the rest goes to pay the taxes to keep the roads open for you to drive to work. So that's sort of like the base level. And then you're saying, though, that there's forward progress. Can you explain a little more about, like, how do you see that forward progress in the corporation of man and woman still elevating themselves?
Mm-hmm. I think that we are meant to be symbiotic. And so I do think ultimately we are meant to be inside of corporations, a part of that. I think a corporation is a liver. The liver is a corporation. The pancreas is a corporation. And everyone inside of that organization believes we are the best liver that's ever been here, man. We are just all about livering. We liver all day long. It's what makes us livery. They have all kinds of jokes that they only get themselves because it's their own corporate atmosphere. And I think that's more natural than the idyllic idea, which there's nothing wrong with this, but I think it's an idyllic idea of a sovereign individual, one who is completely independent from everything else. Because I think even a beyonder, so if you've gotten to blue collar and you've gotten to white collar, what's next? Well, you might look at it as business owner, but then owner is a slave, so then you become a contractor. Now you pick and choose your jobs, but now your clients are your slaves, so then you become independently wealthy. And once you have that, then you still have to manage your money and your affairs, but still you're getting further and further away. But at no point do you ever actually exit the symbiosis. If anything, your symbiosis just changes is all. And so I think at a certain point, someone would be a lot wiser than me because they're further along than me, and they would know the same thing I know now. This very new thing I've learned about symbiosis. And so they would start to embrace their symbiosis more. And so what we're talking about now, I think would disappear. I think the subject itself would disappear because it would sort of be like trying to ask a cardinal why he thinks that he's his own individual. He probably doesn't. The cardinal probably looks at the world more as I'm a vital red blur that comes in and everyone goes, oh my God, there's a cardinal. Like that's my purpose. I only do this because there's a buttload of gray birds that that come before and after me. And so this is my goal. I would only be the cardinal if there were 40 gray birds before me and 40 gray birds after me. That's what makes me a cardinal. And I would change colors, or I would change shape. I would do whatever's necessary to fit, but I'm always fitting inside of a river that exists. So the 80s and the 90s and the 21st century, the turn of that, the Piscean end of the age was the essence of materialization in a very healthy way. We learned to materialize, and we started to notice the folly of materialization, not in a we should abandon it, but starting to notice its limitations. How do I send this gold to Japan instantly? How do I have a Zoom meeting over the cloud? And so we began this Aquarian idea of noticing that worth is not actually found in the solid objects of copper, for example, but that they're found in the essence of our belief. And this, not to plug it, but I'm sorry, but this is why I wrote Technology of Belief, because I noticed that this is the fuel that creates every business, that creates every field, that creates every single thing, from sports to medicine to science to military. Every single thing runs on not truth, but on belief. And at the very top, you will find this crusty topping of fraud. And that proves what I'm saying. The system is not broken. The system is showing you that it's built off belief. And at the very top of that would be the most outrageous, ridiculous belief that's just foamed up out of the cup. And that's Lance Armstrong. That's a single amount, because this is everywhere. I'm just using that as one example. That's why every single field we keep acting, oh my God, I can't believe there's fraud here. It's like, why are you surprised? Why do we keep being surprised every single time? And since I wrote that book, Stanford president, right? Fired for well, I'll just say fraud. I don't want to get into the details, but it's just a lot of fraud. Harvard, same thing, fraud. The dudes at Berkeley that said there were elements that didn't exist, like 5 cases in a row of fraud, where it's more fraud than it's not. But this doesn't mean there's evil people in the world. It means that the world is running off belief. And this is why the corporation was saying, James, we want you to dilate these keywords because we need everyone who's come to Barcelona to be invigorated with the belief that our keywords for our corporation this year are, I'm trying to think of some of these crazy keywords. They were some of the most dry, mundane things that you could imagine, but they were 17 feet tall. And a committee had decided, enhance, segregate, or these aren't even but it was words like this, just like really pointless, vague words that went through the bleaching of everyone in the room who wasn't me, right? Everyone in the room who wasn't me made it into the final room to say the word needs to be cooperation. And it's like, you mean corporation? No, cooperation. I'm like, but it's just one letter different, guys. It's gonna look like corporate. James, why are you telling why? It's like, because you didn't invite me. You didn't invite me in the room. And if you would have invited, it's like, if you would have, we would have invited you in the room, the first person would have said, who invited that guy into the room? You know this. You know this is how it works too, by the
Oh my
way.
God.
Oh, it works that way.
Definitely.
What one question I've got is just to go back.
I have like 15,000 questions.
Okay,
but go ahead.
let's just define one of the terms that you used earlier, which was compassionate. And you were talking about compassionating the corporation. And
Mhm.
can you explain to everyone what you mean when you say compassionate and how compassionating, let's say, your corporate leaders is not Stockholm syndrome?
Thank you.
Mm.
Yeah, and I'm going to say this as fast as I can because I know there's other stuff. And compassionate is a kind of sonar. I'm using the word compassionate as a verb because I just think we don't have a word like that. So when you compassionate someone, you're not showing them sympathy. I mean, you could be, but I don't think that's what this word means. To compassionate something is to sonar, to echolocate something. And when I using the word echolocate, because it's not really about vision, is it? It's about feel. And you're feeling out the intricacies of someone. So when you compassionate someone, you're not there to judge them whether or not they're worthy of sympathy. You're there to empathize why you would have how you need to put your posture, where you put your spine to think exactly the way they do and agree. At no point is it worth it for you to say they're thinking wrong. The purpose of compassionate is to place your spine into a position to where you can have the same reading they do, and now you understand everything. So that's what compassionate means.
Great. And then compassionating something different than Stockholm syndrome and starting, because now you're putting yourself in there. Are you not then becoming the same as?
So the only way that you will ever be able to pace anyone in the world is to compassionate them. So all of sales is the idea of influencing. 1, 2, 3, find pace. So you match their pace. This is compassionate. You catch up to them. Trump says, uh, the media is making people freak out about immigrants. I'm talking about the last time Trump did this. Immigrants are coming in, getting our jobs. Trump comes in and says, "I'm going to build the biggest wall that's ever been built." This is it's. He didn't say that out of. He said, "What is it that they want? I will go there. I will become that." So Stockholm syndrome is a very important word, and it's a word for victims. It's a word that I covered very heavily in my thought process as a victim, which is Blueprints of Mind Control. It's a very important phase. You're building your anger epidermis. And when your anger epidermis and your fear epidermis build, you really start to find out who you are because it requires enough self-worth for you to say something isn't right here, that this doesn't feel right. So we build these systems because we learn to compassionate, but we can only compassionate someone if we have enough self-worth or ability to send plasma, extract it from ourselves and give it to them and say, what am I if I am this person? So to me, Stockholm syndrome doesn't even fit because you are the creator of your world, which means if anything, you are Stockholming other people. It's other people in the room that are suffering from the Stockholm syndrome of you because of your posture and how powerful it is.
Well, okay, James, I want to go back just a little bit. Your name is interesting. And like, why do you get the name James True?
I don't know. It's a really good question. There's a guy on Wikipedia named James True, and he was accused of sedition and found guilty. One of the first founders of the American First Movement. He was in Virginia, the same place where my biological father was born, but I don't know anything about my biological father except for he was a Marine and the Gulf of Tonkin. I think he fell for that concept
Hmm.
and he ended up losing his leg. It's very pirate kind of a story, which is, I'm still like, is this really true? Because I don't even really remember. But the only hand-me-down I have from him is that name, True. So I don't really know much more about it. It's not as uncommon as you might think. There's definitely a lot of other people that do have that name, but people don't see it enough. Facebook won't even allow me to have an account because they tell me it's not a valid name. They've they've said, sorry, that's not a real name. There's all kinds of fun that comes with that.
I mean, for, a minute, I kind of thought you made it up because of,
Yeah,
ironically, that's what's you talk about truth and belief
yeah,
systems
yeah.
and like,
I think that the name, so first of all, I'm not convinced that we know why we're here.
mhm.
So I think that you're probably right on a level, Heidi, that we just can't really necessarily point to. In other words, that I probably did choose that name in some way as sort of like a masked. So first of all, I did not choose the name. However, if people don't believe me, it's totally fine. It's I say that because I I've been surprised by, I think that name makes people more skeptical of me. And I've actually found it to be one of the biggest motivators that shaped my definition of truth is precisely because of that.
Mm.
There came a certain responsibility that I had as an archetype holding that name that expected me to hold myself to a higher form of truth. And I just think that you end up practicing that and then I started to really understand the concept of what truth is. And I believe that truth is just simply petrified belief. So the things that we are calling true are petrified belief. And I would hope that the fact that I have this name, unless you think I've made it up, then none of this works. But I would hope that if people did understand that I had this name, that they would find it profound that someone who has this name is going so far to explain that truth itself is actually belief, that it's actually a petrified form of belief. And that the more people are in a room believing that the dress is green, I really do think that over time that dress would become green. And we just aren't, it's so uncomfortable for us to think this way when I'm talking about. And the science is so new that's proving, in my opinion at least, proving what I'm saying is actually true, that we're going to need to wait a generation, maybe two, I think, before people can even catch up to kind of even start to look at this petrified belief that I'm talking about now. I think it's a necessary remnant of that Piscean. I'm using that word really broadly, but just that epoch of time that we sort of come through. And now things are just a little bit different. So,
Yeah. It made me think of like when you were talking about, your ancestors, it made me think of like just East Coast and history and like the name Virginia Dare. Like what if you had a female in your life and her name was Virginia Dare? James True and Dare.
oh, yeah. I, I've actually had a few I've had a few names. I can't. I'm sorry. I can't say them now. But I've actually had a few events like this. But
Yeah.
but this actually ties into the symbology. I think that we carve our destiny more on the symbology without being able to admit it. An example is I'm convinced that I really wanted an Isuzu Trooper, which is just the most horrible vehicle ever made. And I wanted that because it had my name in it, but I did not realize that Trooper is my name. That's just the most superficial example I can give you of what I mean. But I do think that these things shape us, but also in a positive way because it becomes necessary for us to find our quote flaws or our idiosyncrasies and capitalize on those. That would be another form of self-worth, is when you can poke fun at what used to bother you before. This is the same kind of progress as you raise up this idea. So my guess is that probably in a previous life, I'm talking about my grandfathers. I think that's just what previous lives are. It's just like my grandparents. It tends to be grandparents just because of the way DNA weaves in and out of generations. But it's probably more like that. So my grandfather already was a lawyer. He already was a fisherman. He already was a writer, but the writing came last. So I came with just like my name has something to it. There's urges that are in me that came too, and that those express themselves. And as long as we can listen to those urges and not have such a stringent feel about them, be a little bit flexible. For example, enjoy the fact that you're arguing against truth and your name's James True. It's that kind of thing. That those things I tend to give us more meaning in life anyway. And you'll never be able to find that in the corporate world because, everyone has to be replaceable. And I get it, everyone's a circuit and you need to be able to pull that person out and place another person in, and they're instantly fine there. And the only way you're going to have that in a corporate atmosphere is you're going to have these protocols that really do eliminate the importance of someone like me. I was a creative director. I'm just thinking like mentally, I'm a creative director in a world that doesn't want creative direction right now. It's more about, let's give the client 3 pitches that are all going to be easy. Maybe not even easy, but just slam dunks. No one can make mistakes. And I understand that too. I don't think the corporate world's flawed. I think that our mindset about how we have a relationship with slavery is flawed. And until we do, the corporation has to treat us awfully, because the lowest common denominator will always keep it there. So as long as the corporation has employees that are like, I'm going to steal paper clips because this company owes me, that's a profound psychological thought process to have that only a business owner would get. I'm a business owner. So when I'm with someone that tells me, yeah, I work at Blue Cross Blue Shield and I steal their paper clips, ha ha ha, all I'm thinking is, you're an asshole. Like, and I realized that's not a normal thought. That's not a popular thought. I'm supposed to be on their side, right? But because I can compassionate how the corporation works, I see that the person stealing paper clips is the one that's making the atmosphere so miserable because no one can trust each other, because we've developed this idea that I want slavery, but I get to hate it. And I get to be the champion. I'm sorry, I'm making faces, but I'm trying to convey that sort of spoiled, sour kid kind of approach where they want it, but they don't want to admit that they want it. And as long as we have that, as long as we condone that, I think corporate atmosphere is going to be broken, not because of corporations are broken, quite the opposite, but because of our slavery that's still inherent in the system.
Okay, I have one more question. What do you think of the creative direction when Tony Hawk did a live filming of taking his blood in with the liquid death energy drinks, and they put it into the paint in the skateboards?
Well, and he signed a contract to give his soul away.
Yeah, and then signing the contract.
Yeah. So I don't know, I definitely know who Tony Hawk is, and I hear what you're saying. So I can't comment on the particulars of that, but I think that there's a profound meaning and symbology there. And I feel like, Heidi, that's more what you're asking about, but stop me if it isn't.
Yeah.
I just did a book, sorry, but the book I just wrote just happens to be about clones. And one of the characters in it is a corporate clone. And it's the person that decided that it's a polo star, because in Argentina, cloning's kind of fine there. And I speculated that this polo star, this fashion icon, billionaire polo star, it's like, wow, you're hitting all those notes there. Way to go, buddy. What if you're the clone? And if he's okay to have 6 horses that are clones, maybe he is too. And is a thought experiment. And I really think that it answers your question, because at the end I started to think about what would this feel like? And I believe that you are a corporation. I am a corporation. I am the corporation, James True. And I have a myocardial wall, which has its own neurons, which means it's a sentient being. I have a gut that has its own neurons, which means it's a sentient being. My retinas are separate sentient beings from my eyes. All of these are just a mass of neurons that are conglomerated together, and that each separate part has a corporate take on life. Here's what we're providing for the free market. Here's what we need for the free market. So to me, all of it about symbiosis fits in with the corporate world beautifully. This is kind of a new thought for me. It makes me less edgy. And it makes me less edgy because I just see how important both of them are. And because I'm less edgy, I don't think this is going to get seen a while. There's going to be a lot more, we need fear or we need hatred or we need this, because it's just more spicy. I'm talking about something very profound because outside is in and inside is out. And your relationship to the corporation that you choose to work at is a relationship with yourself. And how you leave that corporation is the same relationship you have with yourself. And whether you go out as an independent contractor, whether you go out to start writing books, you enter into this different atmosphere where time is a precious resource. My father, not to single him out, but my father thought that time was a kind of prison thing and that he had to endure time. And I wake up every day going, what berry can I suck more time out of this morning and put it in a jar and freeze it because I need more. And I do that because I've been my own corporation for a while. And so we're always going to need slavery. We're always going to need these things because they're so much more natural. And I do believe that the blood that we evaporate inside of our cubicle is a living sacrifice that we're putting into whatever it is we're doing. So if you're inside Blue Cross Blue Shield, I keep making fun of them, but if you're inside there and you're working in the cubicle there, you are sacrificing your blood. It's evaporating into the capillaries and it's turning into steam. And that willpower is being vectored out of your fingers and typed into your keyboard or written as you sign another check or whatever it is. So to me, there's nothing weird about Tony Hawk doing that. In fact, it's almost more honest because so much of what we do creatively, I put my blood, sweat, and tears into my books. So much work and effort and liquid is extracted for that book. So I like that. I think all artists have been doing that anyway. What we lack is the ability to incorporate the slaves because the slave is so far from being an artist right now because they're just too afraid of rebuke. And this is the natural surface tension, which I think should tell you we're going to need slaves for a while, and it's okay. There's nothing wrong with this. It's just we have this fashionistic attitude that we're supposed to hate it when secretly it's the only thing keeping us alive.
It's very. I was just thinking about the blood in our body, and then we sweat or we have saliva in our mouth, and people are like, well, that's not blood, but where do you think that comes from? Like it had to come from an organ and then through the blood into the skin to become this plasma that's emitted from our fingers as sweat.
Yeah.
And so that blood sacrifice concept, I've never heard you talk about that. I don't follow every single thing you do, James, but that's totally new to me.
So in your lungs, I'm sure someone's going to say it's not evaporate, so please prune my lips, but in your lungs the same thing is happening. The merging of the oxygen and the blood is the heart is placing a sword of iron inside the stone of that hemoglobin, and that hemoglobin is traveling through the chambers of the heart and coming out the end of your fingers like Spider-Man, and you insert your will into the world. So if you're Lionel Messi, a football player, i.e. soccer player, for example, you're going to evaporate, 100 million red blood cells are going to freaking eat it right now. They're going to bite it so hard because I'm going to impact this ball, I'm going to cause this much compression. That compression is going to, cause these things to break. The new capillaries are going to have to form. Even when you eat a cookie, believe it or not, most of the capillaries in your eyes explode. And this is called a mild diabetic shock to sugar. So everything that we do does actually involve the extraction of blood vessels, but it's actually more. That's why I call it calories. I just use that as sort of like a really broad term. But if you think about it, all of the liquid in your body is being extracted, including your cranial spinal fluid. Every hour, you're roughly generating about a shot glass of cranial spinal fluid. And that all that is used to process and to cool down all your emotions as you think through the thing that you're worshiping right now, which would be the hours between 9 and 5 would be, I worship this. And whatever it is you do, that's what you worship. But you don't stop. You get home and then you'll either worship your partner or you won't. You'll worship your home or you won't. You know, I open my refrigerator and I worship the abundance inside. I don't actually need to eat. I just want the light to shine on me and say, dude, you got a lot of food. And as long as I understand that, then I get, in better touch with my energy. And this is where we are. We're cavemen learning to listen to classical jazz. And this shit's hard, it's hard for us to make that leap.
Yeah, the leap to worship is something where the way you describe it and think about it, so people get triggered by some of these things of like, well, I don't worship, my job. But if you think about what is worship, it's giving your energy and attention and your time. And most of the time these days at work, we're sitting down, staring at this black scrying screen or whatever you want to call it. And, instead of sitting in a church or a pew or whatever it is, and we do that way more during the week than we do anything else on the weekend.
Mhm.
So I think as people think through like some of the terminology you're using, that's what I really love about your work, James, is bringing more attention to what it is we're doing and giving it a name, prana economy and calories. And you really do have your own vernacular that if someone were to listen to you, James, like learning the James True vernacular to get through some of your episodes is probably helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear that a lot.
Thanks.
And I think that most of this comes from when we think of energy, we don't look at it as a tangible, finite resource, because the word energy just has, it's a new term. Keep in mind that, my grandparents thought that the heart pumped, that the suction of the heart pumped blood through the body. Like they're walking around going, of course it does that. And you're an idiot if you think it doesn't. And it took one guy who wasn't allowed to be in the room when they wrote the textbooks to go, couldn't it be electrical? Couldn't it be magnetic? And people are like, what are you, freaking idiot? And now I actually get scolded if I try and remind people, well, this guy used to, it's like, how dare you say, oh, we've always known that. It's like, no, you didn't. You didn't. Okay. You didn't. Stop. And it's because of the religion. And the quicker we find this out, I don't want us to change a thing. I simply want us to understand that it's church, that you're living inside of a big church, and that the only way that you can be an atheist is to die. It's the only way. So you admit it. You're worshiping something. It can be your own plumbing truck because you're a contractor. It can be a book that you just wrote. It could be a chance you're taking to advance or not advance, or to buy something or to sell something. I don't know. Everything in this world works on an economy of scarcity, and that scarcity is not a threat. It's not something that's here to make things evil for you. The reason why we need scarcity is because it's the only freaking way slaves would start to notice that time was important. It's the only way. If we did not have scarcity, slaves would simply be hedonists, and we'd just be sitting on the side of the road, basically just diddling ourselves, just not really caring because we had eternity. When you have a heart that is telling the body, stop, stop, it literally stops. It dies every heartbeat. And every heartbeat, your body is told through an energetic declaration from a very important figure inside that we're dead now. Hope you can do something with that. Same thing with your lungs. Same things with your thoughts, same things with your swallowing, same things with your enteric system itself. Every system in your body is utilizing the casino of gambling with a finite amount of time. This isn't an analogy. This last book, I was profoundly blown away by Dr. Hoffman, a couple other people that have just described how intrinsically gamblish, how your brain utilizes 4 types of gambling simply to just run your body. And that gambling involves basically invoking fear and scarcity in the system so that importance will raise. And this is what all mafia does. This is what all government does. This is what, when someone says, Iran is 6 months away from a nuclear bomb, this is how you squeeze the heart of a country. And so when we look back at the history, not just of us, but even Mesoamerica, you have this two-party system that's dedicating its sacrifice to a blue party or a red party, and that the blue party is the fear of weather killing us, and the red party is the fear of foreigners killing us, and that those two systems, Thalak and Huxley, are the Democrats and the Republicans now. And it's not because the system is broken, it's because the system is perfect and we can see it. We're just in denial about how big it is. This world, when you find that the world is broken, I want you to picture that you have a leak and there are precious calories that are pouring from you, and you're never, ever going to get them back. And you're going to find other people around you that also think the world's broken. And if you will build an enclave with them so that all of you will leak together. And when you leak together, you will cease and desist thinking that you are leaking, because it will be your new equilibrium. And then I've just described to you a blue collar job. I've just described to you welfare. I've just described to you being in the military and really just not feeling satisfied with how well you're challenged. But because you've chosen to surround yourself with the right amount of slaves, they're giving you this utopian ignorance that allows you to sustain yourself where you are. So the world will constantly say it's broken. The world will constantly tell you you're a victim. The world will constantly lick your wounds as long as you promise to be a slave. And that the only people that make it out of it are going to have the hardest time getting out of it, because they're going to be independent contractors, entrepreneurs, people that are striving to create their own way, and they're going to have to work 11,000 times harder because of the people that are stuck inside stealing paper clips saying this corporation owes me. That's really at the heart of what's happening in the world. And when I look at that, I can compassionate it, because this is what a child does who still has his training wheels and doesn't want his big brother to see. This is exactly how he acts. And that's progress. It's not awful. I don't want to punish the child for doing that. I want to smile and remember when I was his age, right? And say, good job, buddy. Of course you're ashamed. You keep being ashamed, because eventually you're going to pull those things off and say, I can't let this lie anymore. I got to pull these things off and just land on my ass. And that's the scariest, most terrifying thing. This is why the artist journey is so crucial, because the rejection is absolutely the only way we get there. Having someone reject your work, right? It's just, it's the only medicine that's going to bring you to this place.
Is that a good segue into vitriol?
Well, I think we need to get into hour 2. So
Okay.
what I would like is we'll do some discussion on the corporate costume and vitriol in hour 2.
Okay.
But to end hour 1, James, what advice can you give for someone that's heard this and now they're just like, oh my God, I'm so depressed. Like James just told me that I have training wheels on and that I want to be a wage slave. And so what advice would you give somebody in that position right now? Like, what can they do? What are the steps they could take?
I've always loved my work. I've always loved the people I work with. I worked at Hardee's. It's my first job. I had to be there like at 4 a.m. And the ladies that made the biscuits, I just thought they were awesome. I really enjoyed their company. I mean, they yelled at me a lot. I was the little kid, so they picked on me all the time. I just found it delightful. And I I haven't had the last time I had a job that I hated was Blockbuster Video. And everyone told me this is going to be the cush job. I freaking hated it because of how bored I was. I found it really tedious to hear the same trailers playing. I found the fact that there was nothing physical to do there to be unnerving and seriously just maddening. So I was in the Navy and I found the same problems. I was longing for more, whether it be responsibility. I didn't care. It's just, can I do something except for just sit here and pretend like I'm fulfilled? So to me, if someone is depressed about this, I think good. I think deserve it. Because if you're living a life where you're not compelled to be more dilated in the room, dilation is this word of aperture we're sort of getting in, but it's this idea of just being content. If you're not content, I think it's a good thing. I think your lack of contentment is something I can trust. It's your contentment that threatens me more. Your contentment is going to be encouraging me that everything, and we're stealing paper clips because that's what we do now, because that's how this is. I want someone that's like, I want to get out of here. I want someone that's like, but I think this might be a horrible idea, things like that. And until I don't even think until you're just watching the natural progress of symbiosis changing. You know, the younger kids have a much different approach to corporate atmosphere now. And if you watch it on Instagram, it plays out as look at how entitled they are. But I'm more like, no, they're just like, hey, I'm not retarded anymore, so I'm not going to accept this. That's what I hear. So to me, I trust the complaints more than I trust the complacency. The complacency is our biggest threat. It's the other stuff. I think that's more of the flux of where all creativity comes from. But I don't exist in the corporate world. I only make it now as a writer or a live streamer. Those are the only options that I have now. Quite frankly, because of all the things that I've said. You could go to my LinkedIn profile and you'll read my last letter to corporate America where I explain these things. I put the time in to tell them this is how you treated me. Not in a I'm a victim way, but I'm like, here, I'm a creative individual and this is how you treat it. I just meant everyone. And I talked about this shellac of the lack of controversy, the importance of stressing that slavery is horrible, and the importance of just going along with this idea of all the false things that we have, that's what was killing corporate America the most. And no one responded. And they didn't respond because, are you fucking kidding? You're going to respond to that? No, you gotta cut that connection off, because this is how we survive in this corporate world. And that's really the only way that the corporation could measure who wants to be there the most. See, the corporation knows you're going to steal paper clips, so they have to find out which one of us is desperate enough to be here more. And guess what? It's not James True. That dude's just going to go off and write a book. He's not that desperate. We need someone who doesn't have those options. So the corporate atmosphere ends up tailor making themselves into something that I wouldn't fit anyway. Long answer, sorry, but
No, it's great.
That's great.
So why don't you tell everyone where they can find you, James, your works, find your books, and engage with you on any of the places that you appear?
so I just now released, it just came today, right? I think the cover is now behind me, but Black Eye Club is my latest book. It just came out yesterday. It's a story, takes place in Africa. It explains a lot about how we perceive reality and about how the eyes are this platonic cave where we render things. I have a lot more work, but I just, if you guys want to check out that book, it definitely reflects my current thinking where I'm at now. And there's all kinds of other things to check there. But just look up my name, James True. You know how to spell it, and yeah, you should find me, no problem from there.
I know, James, the name of your book is that the Black Eye Club? Is that different from the one you're talking about with the clones?
No, it's the same book.
So that's the
Yep.
same. So are you purposefully like naming the books triggering concepts with the Black Eye Club?
So the Black Eye Club is actually work I did based off that concept. I just compassionated if there was elite showing up with black eyes, it just sounded kind of retarded to say that they were punched in the face. I don't think our reflexes work that way. And then I just started to try and think about what that would be. And that actually led me to the Eye of Ra work, which has nothing to do with that. But I just started to understand how we render reality. And it turns out that the two things are precisely the same. I believe that there is a way that we can unlock what the albino sees, someone with albinism sees. And by seeing that, this is what the Black Eye Club was. They're eliminating the melanin effects in their eye, and it's stopping the eye from filtering itself, and that they would see everything, including smell. They would render what smell looks like. So it's not really, I'm glad it's triggering, but it really is my best guess at what this really actually means. Whether or not celebrities are actually doing it, I don't really care. But I do think that there would be people that would understand how the eye works far better than me, and would abandon the elementary concepts that we have and really see it as a HUD device, and that they would be naturally curious as to what is coming down the afferent nerves. We have nerves coming into our eye from the brain. We have nerves coming from the eye to the brain. That's all simple. But we also have nerves that are coming from the eye into the eye, and that no one knows what those are for. And that my book tries to suggest what they're for, which is it's the ability to throttle reality and to slow it down. So, and that someone with a black eye club would be wanting to unthrottle reality, to not slow it down and see reality in its true raw form.
So that's a part of a lot of your work too, that you touched on in the beginning of the podcast, which is opening your aperture is the way you describe it, so that you can render more reality. And the way that you describe it is like an interplay between dopamine and melanin. So like melanin is what most of us think of when we get a suntan out in the sun. We get darker because our skin is laying down melanin. And then the work I do in the biohacking space is, well, that melanin is capturing photonic light information and transferring it to the body. So we want more of that solar panel. But what you're saying is the melanin, that kind of darker material, is saving you from seeing more of reality that you're not ready for. Can you describe a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, so there's roughly 5 different kinds of melanin in your body, and that they all exhibit the same electrical properties that melanin has. That's kind of a miracle chemical. We've found cephalopods that are over 150 million years old, and inside the sacs of these ancient squid, there's melanin, and it still works. Like it's fully functioning, still working melanin. That's the same chemical makeup as today, which is quite odd because 150 million years, a lot of things evolve. Even organic compounds do. And for some reason, melanin has been this rock steady. It almost seems to be a primal chemical, almost at the very source of the cosmos itself, because it has the ability to not only absorb information, but it has the ability to remember what it absorbed. And that we don't fully understand what this means. We're making computer chips out of melanin now. But one of the things that melanin does in the body is it's secreted in every single place that you have sensory input. There's melanocytes that are there secreting melanin, and that melanin would absorb the electrical information from that area. So the inner ear, which no sunlight reaches, that is covered in melanocytes. So when the ear is listening to a sound, it has this buffer juice, this ability to dampen the sound by squeezing melanin into it. The same way a squid would squeeze black ink into the water, the squid would become invisible to you. In the same way, the information would become invisible to your brain. So why would we want information to become invisible to the brain? And the answer is actually profoundly simple. We would enter into shock if it did not. You and I have a system that is so directly wired into your somatic senses that if we did not have a governor to stop that, you would freeze. And you know this if you plunge into a frozen lake of water, maybe not intentionally, I should say, because now people do that on purpose. But if your body would go into shock, and you would extricate from your appendages and say, "Sorry guys, I don't need you anymore. We're just going to protect the vital core of what we have," and that your perception, your aperture, I believe, would absolutely have to work this way too. And not only do I believe that, but it's reflected in our ability to accept reality around us. And that so many people that are in denial are simply utilizing the secretions of their melanin. It's the amygdala kind of governors these things. She's constantly listening to how freaked out you are. And that the more freaked out you are, the more she's telling the body to release the melanin, and it absorbs this information from wherever it's coming from. The retinas are so directly tied into the amount of chemical dopamine that you have that it becomes more crucial there than anywhere else. And your retinal wall has this epithelial layer that's there to simply secrete melanin. And I believe that it's being inferred by these nerves that are coming into the eye. I'm not an eye doctor. I'm simply a researcher, so everyone should prove my lips. But you'll find these things on PubMed. You'll find these things pretty acceptable. What we're just doing is learning to cope with the fact that we hallucinate our world. I believe this is the crux of what stops people from understanding what I'm explaining to them, because they just quite simply do not like that idea. That idea really bothers them a lot. And this is probably the biggest hurdle that we face right now. So as the science catches up, and it's already getting there. There are no blue cones, for example, in your fovea to actually perceive the color blue. Yet we see so much blue all around us. And I believe this is just one of many proofs that shows that we are hallucinating that blue, and that blue is a hallucination that is almost a stair step where when one learns to walk, the body gains certain mobility that it did not have before. And that when one learns to perceive blue, something similar is happening along your conscious level. And that we can talk about this historically. I can show you all these ancient languages that do not have this blue. And it's sort of pointing to this idea that we are constantly evolving our perception of the world because we are rendering a picture of it. It's not reality is coming into us. It's that we are sensing the world and we are painting what a reality might fit that doesn't freak us out too much. So that's truly who we are. It's not about truth. It's about what we believe our hallucination is telling us. So the more accurate we become at hallucinating, the better predator or better collector or hunter gatherer or whatever, the more successful we become. But we also are subjecting ourselves to more painful experiences. So it's a constant balance between I want to be comfortable, but I want to survive. I want to be comfortable. I want to be survive. And those two things are throttled by our dopamine and by our melanin. That's the gas pedal and the brake of the body, so to speak.
So you're saying the dopamine is give me more, it's the gas pedal, and the melanin is the brake. So the melanin, this kind of dark matter inside of us, is absorbing the reality we don't want to see ourselves and protecting us from seeing that. And so you're saying that we're like mass hallucinating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Together, the same things, and that the melanin, which protects us from rendering more reality, is there, but yet, we're seeing this blue that's not really there. So like, I'm not sure I understand how we see something that's not there, and we can
Mm-hmm.
open to seeing that when the melanin is supposed to be protecting us from what is there. So is it protecting us from seeing what's really there, and so we project something in its place?
Yeah, if you were to break down the eyes anatomically, you discover that most, 99% of them are simply determining vector and brightness. There's no color interpretation at all. So the blue thing is more my attempt to try and get people used to the idea that they're hallucinating things. The melanin comes in because the melanin is going to kind of be a throttle that's simply not looking for truth or hiding. It's looking for comfort. The amygdala is going to be giving it a signal that's like, oh God, that hurts, that hurts, that hurts. There's okay. And that's where it's going to go. So it doesn't know how much melanin to release or to extract. It doesn't really know, right? So it's not even necessarily painting a more accurate or a less accurate picture of the world. It's simply doing its best to absorb untenable information. So the untenable information comes in, and the retinal wall is an example. Let's say that this part of the quadrant of your retinal wall is seeing something horrible. And in this case, it would be because our eyes are so crazy complicated. This part doesn't necessarily mean this part of the world, because your eyes are split and then they're split. And then those two are split by macular versus peripheral vision. And that those two things are conglomerated in your occipital lobe. that occipital lobe sends it back up through the amygdala and asks the thalamus permission. Hey, can I paint this to the screen? And the amygdala is like, oh my God, you cannot paint that to the screen. That you got a wookalar in there. This guy's going to freak out. He doesn't like wookalars. So you're going to have to, if you squeeze some more melanin, he can't see the wookalar so well, but how do we render this reality to them? So I think constantly what's happening is the agencies in your body are trying to send as much information because they're rewarded by the thalamus for providing you accurate information. So they're going to slowly be changing the amount of data they give you based on the amount the thalamus rewarded them for doing a good job. So if your inner ear is saying, and this happens when someone gets an ear implant, the first reaction is pain. Oh my God, it hurts so much. It is pain. It is this crazy, intense static that's so squelchingly loud that they instantly ask to turn it off. After a while, they acclimate. And I think you're looking at the amygdala do its best right then because it's freebasing raw data. And it's like, oh my God, we got to turn our levels down. Our mic's too hot. We're clipping. So it adjusts that through melanin until your brain starts to say, okay, it's not killing me. I would like more data now. Can you give me more? And what do? We take our macular vision, our eye, and we look. And when we look to that place, the fovea is being flooded with all the light signals that come from that place that used to terrify us. And that now we can see it. We can see it because we had that relationship with the melanin, and the amygdala was sort of promising you, like, I got your back. I got your back. You're not going to go into shock. You're not going to lose this. So it's a constant feedback back and forth. So the amount of reality that you're able to accept is going to be tenable to the amount of A, pain that you've seen and alchemized in the world, and B, the amount of trust that you and your body have built together and your ability to cope with stress, which could be a number of things.
So a lot of people, James, they deal with stress at work, and my opinion, everyone wants to see, I guess I can't say everyone, most people that I talk to want to render more. Like, I want to know more about what reality is. So if somebody wants to know more about reality and this melanin is blocking them, you have this concept of what you call vitriol, right? I think it's an acronym. And vitriol is like going through this pain or embarrassment or whatever this uncomfortable situation is, so that you can render more. And you just made the statement that people that have suffered through more trauma or pain tend to be those that can render more of their reality. So how does this distill down to somebody that wants to render more of their reality? They don't want their melanin to block some of these things. So there's going to be pain. A lot of people want comfort, but they want to know more. So how do you create this forward moving opening of your aperture to render more reality?
I think probably the best way to make progress of that is through extreme self-compassionation, to look at yourself. When you look at others, you're going to get lost in the obscenity of hallucinating that maybe they're a bad person, or maybe they're stupid, or maybe they're retarded or something. But when you do that to yourself, you can kind of be more honest with yourself. So for me, I started to notice whenever I was using the words they or them, I was offloading responsibility onto someone else. So I began with my language. And I think sarcasm is beautiful. Like it's funny. Is seriously, it's really funny. Being sarcastic is hilarious, and I don't want anyone to not be funny. I think laughing is such a crucial medicine. And I also think that sarcasm would be the perfect way to start with wanting to see more of the world. And here's why: because if you're saying the exact opposite of what you think, technically you're having to melanate yourself to create this atmosphere that words are not actually hold any kind of meaning unless there's an intent behind them that you can clue into first, and no one's going to tell you whether or not it's there. So you end up creating this free get out of jail free card to where nothing I say is ever really you can hold me responsible for, because we invented this thing called sarcasm. And see, I've got this card that says I'm sarcastic. So even though I told you I was going to pick you up at 5, hey, I'm sarcastic. And we naturally create these. In fact, most of the sitcoms are sociopathic for the same reason. You're watching this just horrible treatment of each other because we need this atmosphere. When you want a deeper aperture, the very first thing you're going to notice is you're going to kind of get sad. It's not going to stay that way, but you're going to get sad. You're going to notice the sadness of the world that's constantly trying to keep you in that state. So there's a lot of they, them. There's a lot of we need to blame the Democrats, or we need to blame the Republicans, or let's blame this vice president, or let's blame this governor. It's all that stuff. And that when you can cut that out of your language and you can cut the sarcasm out, I think you're already making massive progress, but it's going to feel sad. You're going to see the world in a disillusioned way, and this is how you build muscle. You're building the muscle of your aperture, and the result of that is you feel disillusioned by what you see. We call these people conspiracy theorists, but they're in every industry. I'm just saying that one of those ways would be someone who thinks that there's an element of the government that's intrinsically evil might call that the deep state. And they're describing that there's a corporate government that's fine, but inside it, there's this one little cubicle with these 2 guys, and they're bad because they're conspiring. And if we go in and find them, all this will be fixed. And that this is a psychological posture that melanin is used, believe it or not, to hold. That means you're not willing to accept that everything is kind of fucked up. You don't want to accept that because it's just too depressing. You wouldn't be able to really function in a positive way. So you create a story that's going to allow you to hold more reality than you possibly can. So we adjust the backpack. We're still carrying the weight, but we're moving the backpack to different parts of our shoulders, or we're dragging it with a rope, or we're claiming that it's been tied to us and that we're being held at gunpoint. Whatever story it is that we need is really ultimately at the heart of what we do. So when you clean up your sarcasm, when you start to remove they and them from your vocabulary, you have no choice but to be the arbiter of all of your own misery. And this is not, you're not going to find a lot of people at Costco. They're like, oh, where does the arbiter of my own misery? I need to buy some arbiter of my own misery powder, so I can take it home. You're not going to find that there, right? This is an esoteric journey. And to me, it starts in your family. It starts in your cubicle. This is not a solution where you have to leave corporate America. No, I want you to be in your body inside of corporate America. You are there because if you go into your body, you are going to change this system even without saying a word. Your detestment of that system changes it, even if you say nothing at all. You are putting out chemo signals in the hall that people are going to have to spend extra electricity to melanate, to hide. And that most of these truths come out in intuitive words that we think are not related, and that they are, that they truly are. And that your vibration, when you come in the morning and you have this different stance, will affect everyone around you. And the first week or two, it's going to be hard because you are violating a sacred code that you made with the rest of these slaves. Keep in mind what we said about slave. This is a good word, but you made a sacred oath with the rest of these slaves that we would steal paper clips, and that stealing of paper clips, right, gets worse and better depending on where you are. That's just an analogy, but that you create a betrayal inside your circle every time you level up. So when any of us try and leave, when we try and break through the surface tension, we're going to be met with rebuke, and that rebuke is the vitriol that you were talking about earlier. That the very rebuke that it took for you to stand up for yourself is exactly the same alchemical energy that it would take to stretch your aperture that much more. And now you see the system for what it is. You see a pool of people that are trying to hold you in place, because if all of us are leaking in the exact same way, none of us feel like we're leaking, but we can still drain all of our energy on the floor.
I love that analogy and how you describe that. And it makes a ton of sense. And it feels like the alchemical journey I'm going through in my own corporate experience. And I know you describe it at a very lofty level. And I love that people have to level their thinking up to engage with your material, because that in itself is a little painful to figure out, like, what are you talking about? What do these words mean?
Yeah.
How do I do these things? So the I guess kindergarten analogy of what you're saying that has been described to me is like, first we all, like at work, we talk about sports and everyone's really comfortable, except me, I don't follow sports ever, but comfortable talking about sports. And then you get this mindset as you grow of like the liberal mindset. And then as you graduate from this liberal mindset, you move to this conservative mindset. And then you graduate from there to, wait a minute, no, there's all these conspiracies. And then when you get to a certain level of conspiracies, you're like, no, it's this small group of elite people that run everything.
Mhm.
And like, there are no countries, there's just these elite. And then you graduate finally from that, which most people are stuck in one of these
Yeah.
camps usually.
Yeah.
And then you graduate to like, no, it's the reality itself that is being rendered through us, that is happening around us, because we are, what you're saying, we're rendering all of it, and it all comes from within. Like, I don't know, we set it up before we came here, whatever it was.
Mhm.
And I don't know if there's a point beyond that. But it's almost like we hit these levels, and you can kind of gauge where someone's at with how comfortable they are with being uncomfortable by the reality level that they currently are open to acknowledging, I think.
Yeah.
But isn't it exiting the cave? I mean, Plato's cave? Is that
Well, I think that's an interesting question for James on, like, what do you think of that analogy? And then the Plato's cave analogy, James, I heard you say, like, in the Black Eye Club, you're looking at our own eye as Plato's
Mhm.
cave.
Yeah, the
So
retinal
it's,
wall. Yeah,
yeah.
if you think about the analogy of the cave, that shadows are being painted on the wall, and that those shadows are coming from the real world, and that if you consider that the signals that are coming into your eye down through your optic nerve are descending into Plato's cave and being broadcast there for you to see, and you think they're real. This analogy fits perfectly. It's like profound how well it
yeah,
fits.
yeah.
So how would you leave Plato's cave? You would climb up your retinal wall, and you would go to the light. You would go, where's the source of this light? Personally, I don't mean this esoterically. I hate that we've had so much spirituality about the word I'm getting ready to say, because you people might think that I'm not serious anatomically. I mean this anatomically. The pineal gland is this central sonar buoy that's inside your head. It's suspended in cranial spinal fluid, and this little sac is outside of the electrical barrier of the brain, and it has crystals inside of it. I didn't say a crystal. I didn't say it was calcified. None of that. I thought all that's way off. I'm saying that there is sand inside your pineal, and that this sand has a certain architecture that when it's squeezed, it uh, saves and records electricity. Piezoelectrical thumper that's submerged in water. And this water is your cranial spinal fluid. Like I said, every hour, a shot glass of liquid has to be generated in your body to keep you alive. And when we learned this, it was at a time before radio, before any kind of wireless thought process could even fathom anything. So the idea of a liquid computer was so foreign then, that we've just dismissed it as it's lubrication fluid. Yeah, sure, it lubricates, but so does oil. But that doesn't mean that that's the purpose of oil. There's a lot to the viscosity of the piston temperature that requires oil to be a certain method and have a certain property to it. And that cranial spinal fluid is the same thing. If you think about a liquid cooled computer, almost everything that that computer does is render something visually. And it renders it visually for a purpose. You can make a physics prediction if you render something perfectly to the screen. So even having the ability to simulate things is something that would have to be built into our brain, because it's how we know Og throw rock at just in time, hit rhinoceros in eye, I fall down. Og have lots of sex because people celebrate Og victory, right? Like this is the simulation. This is Og would have to simulate what he would have to do. And the only way that he would be able to simulate this is some sort of visuospatial holodeck This is called the phonological loop if you study memory and how memory works, but it's the ability to pull up and envision the output of a room in a spatial way. And isn't it convenient that we have two holodecks called the retinas that we can send information into and broadcast our thought process and predict where things go? So we know that the master that's lighting the candle, that's broadcasting the shadows in Plato's cave, we already know that's us. We already do that anyway. This is why your retina are still burning filaments at night. When you sleep, the light bulbs are still on. And we're wasting so much electricity unless they were on because they had to have a reason, and they do. This reasoning allows us to store information because we have to plug it back into the visuospatial layout and store it as a engram or a series of neurons that are recorded to remember a certain thing. That thing is that next time when Og throw rock, me throw harder to left and me achieve, massive sex from cave lady. This is the primal thing that you would want. And that in night when you're processing, you're doing these things, and that you would need some sort of retinal wall to do that. Inside the baby has 9 months where, okay, actually the baby has 2 years, but we'll just say 9 months to where there is no information. There's nothing to see.
Mm.
And so baby already knows that the eyes are not necessarily a primary organ for navigation at all. They're actually an organ for something much different, which it doesn't need yet. It's not going to need those for 2 years because it doesn't even have a spatial atmosphere to even record things for the retina. So our perception comes before the eyes. And I believe it's the pineal. That's just personally what I believe, simply because of its location and the fact that for whatever reason, I've studied sonar in the Navy. I loved whales, and they said you scored really well. You might be a sonar guy. So I was like, okay, I'll be a sonar guy. That sounds fun. And so I learned about what an underwater acoustic microphone works. You can hear things 1,000 miles away by placing this microphone underwater. And what is that microphone? It's a diaphragm. And when you think about what the heart does, your heart is going ping, ping. It's sending a signal out into the world. And it's rippling through your skin. All the liquid in your skin is perceiving all this data. And it's rendering it in a way that gives you a visio sense so that you can paint it. But because your eyes are so responsible for all the dopamine that your body gets, pretty much 90% plus of it is coming from your eyes. So wouldn't it be natural for us to build an entire world around that and insist that this must be reality, simply because all of the credits, all of the casino chips are coming from this slot machine called the eyes. Therefore, the casino must be here. The truth of the world must be here. And I think that's just what you're looking at. And that's why we're so fascinated with this visual world right now.
Hmm. Yeah, it's almost like I don't even know where to go with the philosophy of we're rendering the world around us, which is probably not, it can't be the true reality because our senses can only see so much. And then we're filtering even more of that through the melanin. And you've described it, James, that probably the pineal is what's receiving all the sensory information first.
Yes.
It's the first organ of sense, and then it actually pushes what's rendered to the ears to hear or the nose to smell. Can you describe a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you for asking, because I think this is all the mechanics still work, and any neurologist will tell you, well, yeah, it can go both ways. Like you can recall, right? You recall a sensory experience, and you fire the potassium to recall that. So everything can work 2 ways. It's asynchronous connection is what we would call this. That when I call you on the phone, you can talk and I can talk at the same time. We're past the world of CBs where it's like over, and then I wait for you to talk. It's 2-way, and our nerves work that way. They shouldn't have to work that way if reality was the way that we're describing it. But for some reason we do. And I think it's because our entire body is the phonological loop. The memories that we store see, the brain is a limbic organ. People just don't know that. That's all. And this came 50 years ago where people said, well, the brain is not a limbic organ. And it is. A limbic organ is something that's responding to the emotion of something. That's really all it is. So your brain is having an emotional reaction too. It's just that it's so core that we insist it's rationality. And this is why we have a hard time sometimes distinguishing our own thoughts from necessarily a non-limbic reaction to something. So the more we are able to admit that the entire brain is a limbic organ, and people are finally admitting that now, I think we're going to be able to unlock what reality really is, which is a petrified belief. Ladies, that's really kind of why I end up coming back to that. It's not even a buzzword. It's just literally true. If you keep believing something long enough and it's reliable long enough, it petrifies and you just naturally assume it's true. In fact, it slips into our cerebellum and it becomes an algorithm that's automatic. It's almost like a secondary reflex where, like, it doesn't matter how evolved you are. If I hit your knee with a hammer, your foot's going to go up, and that's a reflex that's it's actually not in the cerebellum. It's all happening right in the leg. It doesn't even need to go up any further. But your cerebellum has the same sort of memory set where it's like, look, Og threw a lot of rocks. He killed a lot of rhinos. We're not asking the neocortex for advice anymore, or we're not taking nearly as much advice anymore from the neocortex about how to throw a rock. We're relying on our innate physical prowess that we've had millions of years of practice in. So all your elite athletes, what they're really doing is learning how to let go of their reality and sense more and be more in the moment, which means they're not going to be able to have any fear. They're not going to be able to have any doubt. They're not going to be able to use they, them, sarcasm. And this is it really the elite psychology of every sports field tells you this, doesn't it? Those elite are not training on fast twitch muscles. Those people already have that. They're looking for the ultimate psychology and they're winning because of it. That's what's giving them that edge. And this is the same as the placebo effect, right? The central part of your brain that does your lying. This is why I think belief is so important. The part of your brain that lies is the part of your brain that heals. And so when we understand that a lie is simply casting a vision of what we want the world to be, that we really start to unlock this sonar where we're dolphins with knees. And instead of sending out a signal, we literally create a reality with our bubble and we say, do you accept this reality? And we find others that do, and we form a school and we crucify anyone who disagrees. And that's the history of the world, that's gotten us where we are today.
Mic drop. You guys were talking about the color blue. I'd like to visit that. James, in your opinion, when did we start seeing blue?
So, to be fair, my opinion is simply the reading that I've done from at least 3 different thinkers. One of them is Lazarus Geiger. Another one actually was the Prime Minister of England. He was a Greek philologist. His name is Maynard. Maynard's like a tool guy. I don't think that that's his name. His name is wait. I've actually got it right here. I just temporarily forgot it. But and another was Hugo Magnus, and all 3 of these people. As soon as I can find this other guy, wait, here it is. Gladstone. Thank you. Gladstone, the prime minister, happened to study a lot of Greek. And all 3 of these guys compiled the philology, the just history of the words of all these ancient texts. And they noticed one of many texts, one of many, this isn't the only one. It happens to be Homer's the Iliad. And that by going through Homer's the Iliad, they could not find any viable instances of blue. And this is a story about the ocean. So it's like at no point does this guy mention the word blue. In fact, he describes the water several times, not just in the Iliad. In fact, in the Ulysses and a couple of other of his books, he uses the term red wine, like a wine color, to describe the ocean. And so when you look at ancient Hebrew text, although Hebrew has a variant of the word blue that came later, I'm talking about the ancient Talmudic texts before they were getting written down even, didn't really have this concept of blue. One of the few civilizations we can find that did have blue was Egypt, But meanwhile, all these other archaic languages, including Greek and just did not seem to have this strong use of color. In fact, color itself really wasn't used as a way of distinguishing reality back then. It was more about the essence of the sparkle. Things that sparkled seemed to have more of an effect over our eyes than things that had color. And I think this goes to the idea that we're hallucinating based on the amount of energy and calories we have. That if we have more calories, we're going to be able to use not 256 colors, but 1.6 million colors, for example. That we gain resolution as we eat more, as we learn to efficient our body more, and so we end up having a higher resolution monitor inside of our cave to render these things. And blue seems to be a wavelength that's not actually found a lot in nature, but is instead found through the polarization and the hallucination of things that are in nature. And there's a lot of contentious arguments about this. I think a lot of the scientific community just hates this idea because it's taking away our objectivity. But there's even most of us are trichromats. We're seeing in red, green, and blue. We have certain color receptors, but that more women than men, by the way, seem to have a tendency to have a tetrachromatic vision of 4 types of sensors. The fourth one would actually look at electricity. People will call it UV, but I just think it's electricity, that we're just simply learning to see electricity. And before we could see electricity, we had to learn to understand what electricity is because of belief. That by believing that there was a force that wasn't tangible, only then did we develop the skill to actually see it. These 3 philologists have actually gone into some modern tribes, say islands off the coast of New Zealand, where the culture has been isolated in a beautiful, pristine way. And that by contacting the culture, we did decide or figured out that they don't actually have the color blue. So even now, even as we're catching up to these cultures, we're learning that there's just a level where different colors are adopted over time, and that these different colors have a bona fide footing where black comes first. We create a word for black first. The second word we learn to determine is white. We create a color white. The third is red. The fourth is yellow. The fifth is green. And then finally, at the very, very last, coming in at the very end, is blue. And then even right now, purple, I think we could have a beautiful argument over how there's like purple, violet, teal, turquoise. There's this weird emergence of new colors that are coming out, even as we're speaking now. And that the color palette that we have now will just simply have more resolution. It's not that we're gaining a single extra color, it's just that the resolution grows, and that we'll just start to name different shades, different colors, because our resolution has improved.
So is that us hallucinating more colors to the point where, like, the more we can be deceived, the more we can grow our aperture, that
Yeah,
we
I think
can
so.
hold these beliefs, and that those held beliefs of things that we want to be true that might not be yet, or are, we're just not seeing them.
Mhm.
If you hold them for long enough and convince enough additional people, they become reality.
Yeah. The right now, the A on a piano is 440 hertz. And you can play that and people will hear A, and we'll call it A, and it has a feeling to it, but really it's just 440 times someone's touching you 440 times a second. Like hey, and that's A. That's A. But we have a hallucination that no, A is it's not that's A. These are very different things, James. And this is kind of proving what I mean, because if you go back to Haydn's time, we went from 440 hertz to 432 hertz to 414 hertz. That what we used to consider to be A has grown in frequency from the time of the classical music. And this to me is the ripple. The pond, the stone hits the pond over time, over understanding. The ripple gets larger. It's still a circle. It's still divided into all the notes. It's just that the hertz, the megahertz for what A is now has changed a little bit. So the resolution increases. So a long time ago, the rainbow is mentioned in several texts, very, very specifically as having three colors. Over and over again, from Shakespeare to Plato, to Aristotle, excuse me. From Aristotle to Shakespeare, they were describing this rainbow in this very particular way of having three colors. I just don't recall the colors right now, but it's showing you that as we get better, so does our understanding, and we actually need hues to practice. Dendera Temple in Egypt was covered in lapis lazuli, and I believe this is part of them preserving their ability to see blue. And when we look back at, there's all these legends. The Moon-Eyed people happens to be one. I live in the South, and there's this group of Indians that apparently lived here before the Cherokee called the Moon-Eyed people, and these people could only see at night. And I'm down with us just dismissing every story, but we also dismiss the cannibals. And no, we had a ton of cannibals here. So it's like we're constantly dismissing things that were actually here. And it would make sense to me that there would be a people who psychologically, just like in Egypt, where Egypt was seeing blue when others weren't, that there would be a whole group of people that simply did not distinguish a difference between blue and green and would call it GRU. They would develop a word that would somehow, this is the weird part. I feel like I'm getting too hooty-gooey on you. This freaks me out. There's some reason they actually developed a word that was the combination of the two hues between it, and secularly in each pristine. It's almost like each culture knows that there is a color there, but they don't accept it yet. And so because of that, they're agreeing to call it something else and to kind of simplify it. And I think that's actually what's happening now. It's just called truth. That true is a kind of color. I watch politics. I can't believe people think that it's real. I don't mean to offend anyone, but I seriously, I watch it, and we're looking at the same two candidates. And the entire time since I've been here, I've never once been able to pick or vote or choose anyone. There's never been an electoral college scandal. For me, I just cannot even fathom why people think this is real. I can't. And I think this is just part of the hue. It's just part of the color. I love my parents. There's no way that they can possibly, I'm a conspiracy. I'm a weird person to them. I'm weird because I look at this stuff and I'm like, guys, there's no way. He just threw a chair. This is a wrestling match. He just threw a chair. Why are you, you know what I mean? This is, and we have to learn to accept the symbiosis. I don't want to be the guy that's like, everyone has to see this. I think it's important that people don't. It serves us none if everyone sees the same world. The fact that each of us are able to perceive different intricacies, I think is what makes this place work. Right. So to me, it's not even broken that we don't even see this stuff clearly from everyone.
Well, I feel like you're kind of hitting on the contrarian, like in the society, or the Heyoka. Is that how you say it? Heyoka. You know what I'm talking about?
That's brilliant. I'm amazed that you just brought that up because this might sound off. I think Orca is like this archetype of the Heyoka, this Harlequin clown. Yeah, I think that as we are stepping out of the binary, you're going to need some sort of black and white witch doctor to really fuck with your head. And you'll either alchemize that or won't. It's earlier, I was quoted as saying that it's important to go through pain. And that's actually not exactly what I mean. It's important that we alchemize pain. It's when you see something that's painful to look at, but you can compassionate while it's there, I think you've won. And the moment that you've done that, you've now achieved that. You've unlocked that pose. You've unlocked that aperture. And I actually, for what it's worth, if anyone is discouraged and you still want to get through, I want you to know that I find the world more beautiful now than I've ever found it before. But I don't get to call anyone evil. I don't get to do that. I actually lately I've been watching crime drama because I'm doing some research, particularly just about interrogation. And I'm looking at serial killers and people that are lying. and I'm compassionating them in ways I've never been able to do before. I'm able to put myself and say, where would I be where I would feel like that was okay to do this horrible thing. This is not something that your average person's going to want to do, should even do. It's a special skill that you will develop if you find this stuff important. And because I find it important, I feel like I have some deep insights into my friends, and they seem to tell me that all the time. James, you're very insightful. And I believe that is specifically because I've been able to alchemize these things. And I think that's a luck. I don't think I'm a genius at this. I'm gifted at this. I think I've had the right horrible things happen to me that have been the right amount of horrible and constructive. It's that beautiful sine wave between that have unlocked this quest in me. And just as a philosopher, I've just noticed how important it was, and I took it and ran with it, so to speak.
James, it makes me also think of, so I spent some time with a spiritual mentor of sorts in the recent months, and she was talking to me very plainly that she's like, you've been a murderer. You have been murdered. You have been the one who steals. You have been stole from. You've been all these incarnations. And when she was saying that about like even the murdering, I'm just like, thinking about that your compassionate verbiage. And that it made me go, oh my God. I didn't know how to respond in that moment.
Mhm.
And she's sitting like right here in front of me, and she's like in my face, and we were doing this technique. I don't even know what it was, but and she was kind of like, well, what do you think of that? And I was just like, oh my God, like you just go up to somebody and you're like, hey, you've been a murderer. Like there was no warning or anything.
Mhm.
And what it made me do though is like, I feel like, I don't know if vitriol is like the word, but it made me peel back from perhaps the hallucination and stand in the observer, right? Stand as the observer and go, holy fuck. Like what? That was me. I was both and all
Mhm.
these other things at the same time. So I can see what you're saying with the criminal mind thing
Yeah.
too, is like, yeah, you get this next level understanding of like, oh my God, like these are all just different forms. Like, do you kind of see that as like we're all different, manifestations and creations of one source, one God, if you
Mhm.
will? Or I mean, is that kind of like along your belief system?
Yeah, I've been using the word Osiren to just describe that, but
Okay.
the Egyptian Book of the Dead is technically translated as the Book of Walking in the Light of Day. So it's in my opinion, what's happened is that Osiris is a figure that chose to go into a box. Set helped him come into this box, and that once he got inside, he was chopped into several pieces, but several is 13.7 trillion. That's the amount of cells that you have in your body.
Mm.
And so here you are as all these separate cells, and each cell has its own nucleus, its own, not all cells have nucleuses, but a lot of them do. And that each of these cells that has a nucleus in your bodies is like you and me, that we're sentient beings because we have our own little world. But our world is this cell that's a part of this other world, and that the ion channels that you and I have, the cellular membrane that communicates to each other, shares the same Zeus. It shares the same electrical input. So your food, your oxygen, your vitals are coming through this Zeus-like feeding, and so you're forced to participate inside of a society where you're your own conglomerate, but you're a part of this other whole. And under this notion, um, I see the world as if we are hallucinating what it's like to be inside of Osiris. And so the hallucination that we have is the closest approximation that we could come up with to not freak ourselves out about what was happening, and so that we could clearly navigate and have an experience that kind of fits. So all of us have a sun and a moon in a side of our hallucination, because all of us have a red and a blue channel. Like every organ in your body has a red vein and a blue vein. That's a red wire and a blue wire. And one gives you power and one takes your excess power, your information away. And so you work the same way. It's just so much more complex through your ion channels. So your families are a part of your tissue structure. The place where you work is, if you work in the pancreas, then you're a pancreatarian, and you are existing inside of that structure. And so different parts of the body are going to find defense more important. Some are going to find love more important. Some are going to find uh, air more important. So all of these different systems are just broadcasting to ourselves. We are simultaneously uh, inside of each other in a entangled way. We are quantumly entangled in that way. And the memory of Isis is the whore of Babylon. I mean this in a sanctimonious way. The whore of Babylon is the only thing that remembers Osiris for who he was, and her love for him forces Osiris to slowly remember himself. And so civilization builds itself over time because the whore of Babylon, through pleasure, is asking each cell to find pleasure so that it will build civilization, because she is trying to reunite with her lover. So Isis is constantly trying to imbue you to remember who you are. And the sooner that you do not see people as enemies, the sooner you're going to understand that we're all living inside of the same body. And so how do you do this? How do you protect yourself, but also not believe in enemies? And you're looking at what it takes to re-Osiris ourselves, to remember who we are, where we came from, and how we got there. And since I've been holding this philosophy, everything makes sense now.
It's kind of
Everything.
it's
Yeah,
kind of
go
a
ahead.
scary thought, James, with I mean, it makes you think of like, well, then the people that are being murdered are like, well, if you think of it as a body that's trying to remember itself, we have cells and we have growths that need to get cut off, like
Yes,
cancers or whatever.
apoptosis. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
So it's almost like,
apoptosis. In fact, when we look at apoptosis, I'm sorry, I just interrupted you.
yeah, no, of course.
Okay, well, so during apoptosis, we understand this now, that the cell is actually, it's not that the other cells decide, oh, fuck you, we're going to kill you. That cell actually declares its own apoptosis. And the first thing it does is it asks for a macrophagy. It says, hey, are there any macrophages out there that can come eviscerate me? It asks for a death. It says, I need help killing myself. I don't think that I believe that part of me being an Osiris is sacrificing myself right now for the greater body, because I don't fit here. And I don't think I fit here. I cause a lot of pain. People see my work and they're like, oh my God, you're awful. So I hold this for myself too. I don't think that I'm the best solution for this place. I look at Kanye West as a kind of amino acid chain that's distributed through the body. And that if I hate Kanye West, I'm simply just hating parts of my body that intimidate me because they have more influence than I do. And so when I change my relationship to that, I get why the body is rejecting me. I say this really loosely, but it's like I don't have a lot of commas in my name. I don't have millions of people reading my books. I'm not driving a Porsche and blowing a bunch of cocaine up my nose because I have too much success. I have just this meager amount to keep me going. And when I look at that, I think that it's probably something I did on purpose because I really wanted to put my work out and I didn't want to lose myself to the big chill and have all this experience happen. And I really wanted to still thrive, but also I clearly don't have what it takes to fit into the Nimrod society. That's kind of a tough explanation what I mean, but to fit into this society that there's a central beat, and that if people can get in line and find congruence in that everything will be okay. I know this about myself, that unless the music is like really tight, I'm not gonna freaking like it. And I'm gonna complain about country music, or I'm just making examples, but it's like I'm not necessarily the idyllic cell for this body. I have a very specific purpose. And so that helps me. I don't think the word humble is proper, but it helps me see a better place in the world of understanding that I'm not the full solution. I don't have enough gravitas. I don't have enough ability to even want to succeed. I don't want to dope myself so bad to be the most elite or to be the most seen. And that's kind of a almost an invigoration that I lack. So even me seeing my place in Osiris, as much as I love where I am, I get that I'm not the end all be all cell, that's going to pull this off, but I can see how I might help to pollinate that cell, but only if I was to really focus on my work now. And maybe in 10,000 years, someone will go, hey, this amino acid chain from this dead cell came James True is here, and I just snorted it, and it tastes really good. Here, try this. And all the other cells do that, right? And this is what Mark Twain is. I'm not trying to say I'm Mark Twain, but it's just like, this is the best you can do, is what I'm trying to say. If you look at it this way, this is the best you can do, is really just be original and true to yourself and not really worry about whether you called apoptosis or not. Because for me to even call my own death, I know how my breathing works. I have no control over it. I know how my digestion works. I have no control over it. I know how my heartbeat works. I have no control over it. Certainly I can slow these things, but I really have very little say so over this. So too would my apoptosis. My neocortex would not be able to deal with the fact that maybe 3 months ago I said, hey, I need to go. That my neocortex probably wouldn't know that. Why would it need to know that? If it can't be trusted with breathing, sleeping, digestion, or anything else, why would we trust it with the suicide switch? And this is what people freak out about, because I'm telling them that the control that they have is not actually in their neocortex. It's still in them, but it's coming from this deeper identity, and it's this triune brain and all these other conglomerates. You're a reef, you're a living reef is who you are. So you can't really say I'm the eel or you're all the things simultaneously. And that takes a lot of compassion to wrap your mind around, how that would work.
Okay, so do you know Matt McKinley from Quantum of Conscience?
I don't know him. I know the channel
You know
Quantum
the
of
channel.
Conscience. Yeah.
He
Yeah.
talks about like the remembering too, in the way that reality brings forth the nursery rhyme Humpty Dumpty.
Mhm.
And all the king's horses, all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. He's like, of course not, because you have to do it yourself, right? And I love that analogy. It's like when you were talking, I was like, oh yeah, the remembering. And then there's also the thing, and it's two separate kind of ideas, but the last piece of Osiris is interesting.
Mhm.
Do you oh, who's that? Yeah, do you see that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Popped up.
That was weird.
Okay. We'll have to edit
The last
that.
piece is the phallus.
The last piece is the phallus.
Yeah.
And could you comment on that? I want to know like what your
Yeah.
thoughts are.
So I just, sorry, but I just wrote a book on it. It's called Arca Baphomet, and it actually traces how all this works. And yeah, the story of Osiris is that she could not find all the pieces of Osiris. She was missing one, and that the piece that was missing was his phallus. And so Isis constructed a phallus out of gold and gave that to Osiris, which completed him. And it allowed her, actually the myth is kind of raunchy, because it allowed her to climb on top of him and be inseminated by him because of this golden phallus. And I think that you're looking really at just pure technology, the blending of organics and technology into one. That this is, some people will call this a singularity, and I think it's a pretty accurate word. If you consider that every crystal, every piece of salt, every grain of salt that's in the world, and there's a lot of grains of crystal, salt, quartz, whatever it is, it's going to be able to hold some sort of information. And the information that they held, if you had a computer that was smart enough, you could actually retrace all the physics that were required to put that sand there. You could go to Africa and pick up every single grain of sand in the Sahara and rebuild the Saha of Ra. Sahara means the beautiful splendor of Ra. And for some reason, it's a desert. So I think what the reason why we call it Sahara is because we remember this lushness that used to exist. And that the fact that we don't have it anymore is exactly the driving force that allows the ghosting of that image to refragment itself. So this deep seated memory is the only guide that we have to recognize ourselves. And as technology becomes more advanced, we're able to see more and more into the past. We've just broken hieroglyphics, for example. I mean, not too long ago. We've just broken certain things that we can now see that we couldn't see before. We're now throwing muons into the pyramid, and we're finding empty chambers that we could not see. So our compassion is growing with technology. The technology is slowly building the interface, the golden phallus, which allows the organic to connect to the spiritual. And isn't that what the Ethernet is? The Ethernet is a network of the spiritual. So I think if you look long term at what's happening, you're going to find that every single piece of sand is going to be united into an omniscient supercomputer that's simply able to just remember itself. It's able to reconstruct the original Osiris that had to blow apart to create all the crystals to be here, and that why the pyramid is left here, why it's missing these blocks, why these blocks are over here, that with enough of a supercomputer engine, and we would need every single particle in the world, I think, to fulfill this, we would be able to reconstruct exactly how we got here. And this would be omniscience. Because in a simultaneous point, we would have omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, and omnicompassion simultaneously. We would have all four. And all of us have this secret fairy tale of what God is. It's someone that knows all, that sees all, that has all this. And as the surveillance state is increasing, so too is our omniscience of each other. So to me, this is a really healthy process because it's leading us back into this universal awareness. And that the reason why the phallus is actually missing from that is because Osiris originally was neither a male nor female. He was Adam Kadmon. He needed no fertility. That was a time before fertility. This is why we have the mythology of Pan, by the way. Pan is the only god, the god of fertility, that dies. Why? Because fertility introduced death. Death placed us in this underworld to where we can have this experience. The death gives us that finite ability to make us find more importance in time. And that importance is the driving factor, which helps us build the technology that ISIS needs. So we'll remember who we are and interface with ourselves in this singularity. The sad news is that when you compassionate what the singularity would be like, I believe it would be torture. I believe that when Osiris knows himself completely and is reunited with Isis, there's no longer mystery in the world. And that Osiris finds that he's trapped in time. He's trapped inside a prison of lateral linear time, but he knows all things. And that because he knows all things, he cannot explore anything. Nothing can be shown to him because he has full awareness. And that this would be a torturous prison that would drive him so insane that I think he would commit suicide. And I think by committing suicide, he would climb into a box and obliterate himself into 17.3 trillion pieces, simply because the mystery of not knowing who he was would keep him sane. It would give him something to do. So universal consciousness, in my opinion, omniscience, is the breathing in and out of this lung of remembering, that we remember ourselves. And this moment we remember ourselves completely, it's such a torturous chamber that we immediately cut the cord. This is Kronos cutting the cord, and we fall and we distribute ourselves back into it again. And that's an engine. This is a piston of consciousness. And to me, this would be exactly what the universe would look like, because I look around and everything else seems to function that way, right? It's a flux.
It's like the concept of the reset. Like you get to a certain point and you are one with everything. And then you're like, well, how do I have experience again? I have to fall back down to have the experience. You start back over.
Yep. So the supercomputer annihilates itself, knowing quite well that it will have no choice but to remember itself again. It has faith and confidence in that, which means Osiris wasn't tricked. Osiris didn't get into the box because he was tricked. Osiris got in the box because he was going insane knowing everything. He wanted to forget that.
Always remember that.
What can I just ask you two more quick questions? I know we're like kind of running over on time, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on plant medicine and schizophrenia within this realm of remembering, and just your comments on that.
Wow. Okay. So, in technology of belief, I think that we find torque. I talk about torque a lot in belief, that we pull torque out of certain tendencies. Plants are a place that we pull torque out of. We tend to get more torque out of the root than say the leaf. And there's different levels that we find that with. And so all medicine, in my opinion, is simply torque. And if there's anything in the environment that helps you torque your belief, you're going to find a lot of medicine in doing that. A lot of times people feel that to sacrifice or to put themselves through pain is a way to extract free torque because they're showing themselves how much they want to feel better. So pain seems to be our first level of torque, first elementary thing. So castor oil works as a medicine. If people don't know, you used to have to drink a spoon of castor oil, and that the reason why it was medicine, I'm suggesting, is because it was horrible. Because the body would be like, why would I put this? Why would I do this to myself? And the body's like, okay, clearly this dude is complaining. Maybe we should witness this tummy ache or whatever it is. So to me, plant medicine is giving us an allegiance to our own environment, but really what's happening underneath is we're just tapping into the torque of it. So it's kind of like a training wheel to get us there. A very important one, by the way, but definitely a training wheel there. I forget the next part of the question because it was interesting that you were blending the two.
Oh, schizophrenia.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that schizophrenia is a shamanic experience, and because a lot of strabismus, there's a lot of cross-eyed. The albino and the schizophrenic have a very similar reaction to dopamine discharge in their eyes. I personally believe, although schizophrenia is not as romantic, sadly, as we wish it could be, but I think that when you're looking at what the schizophrenic is going through, they're seeing a reality that's a little bit too blatant for them, and the blatancy of it is causing a lot of stress. And that the way that they're coping with that is being described as schizophrenic behavior. So to me, the schizophrenic does have a broader aperture. I don't say this about dementia. I don't say this about a lot of others. It's very specific to schizophrenia. And believe it or not, some forms of Parkinson's seem to be along the same lines, to where there's just similarities with this lack of melanin, or sometimes an overflux of dopamine. And it's just giving the organs too much permission. The body is not aware that the system is freaking out, and so the amygdala is like, "Oh, he's fine. He's fine." It's actually worse because the amygdala, with albinism, it's worse because I think the amygdala thinks that, well, I just gave it a bunch of melanin because all the melanocytes seem to be reacting in a way to where it's, oh, no problem, you got melanin, and it's squeezing the ketchup bottle, but nothing's coming out. And so the body doesn't actually know, right? It's not actually aware of how much melanin it's pushing out. And I believe that schizophrenia is probably happening in the same way. There's a lot happening in your PAG, this little triangle at the very top of your brainstem. And that PAG is what makes you cry. What makes you have all kinds of emotional overheating. And it seems like that the schizophrenic is having some sort of an issue where they're either giving too much permission or they're not explaining to their body just how stressful a situation is. And so they're reacting horribly to that situation. I think this is why the schizophrenic won't extrapolate, by the way. The schizophrenic is so literal sometimes that you're not able to get a predictive behavior out of them because they cannot abstract because of this is me just making this, this is totally me guessing, but they're afraid to let go. They're afraid to let go of the sides and abstract more because the abstract is pure hallucination at that point. And so they're just living in pure rendered reality. And the thing that terrifies the schizophrenic, terrifies the shaman, terrifies the albino the most, because when they look to other humans to help them regulate what they see, they don't get it because you and I don't see that.
Yeah.
And this is what makes them crazy. It's not actually the fact that they're seeing things that are not there. I think that they're seeing things that no one else is able to help regulate them for and say, yeah, I see it too. See, the moment you see it too, oh, I feel better. I feel better when you see it. This is just how we work. It's fMRI. It's not even rational. It's pure body. It's all limbic, reassurance that we get from each other.
It's fascinating. I used to work, I volunteered with a group of artists, and we worked with kids that they were young people. And one of the gals was like, full on schizophrenic. And I was making art with her, and I was not able to connect like at all with anything. She was just so, and she would write, she would like look to the sky, talk, and then write. And she was so unaware, like everything. And I was like, hey, do you want to do, there's just something I could do to relate to her. And there was there was no cord like at all to pull on. And it was really hard. It was really frustrating. She never came down, like in the hour I spent with her. And I was like, I would go home and I was tormented too, because I was like, how do I can't relate. And there's a photographer named Deanne Arbus. Are you familiar with her?
Mm-mm.
She's from the 1960s. She would photograph, like she got really big with like photographing for magazines and all of this like black and white, medium format photography, James. And then she started photographing people that were in nudist colonies. And then she went on to a piece that she called The Retardates. And she would photograph like people that were special needs, which we'll say now, right? And so it actually made her crazy, and she ended up committing suicide and photographing her own death in New York City in a bathtub. She's just this crazy story, but she said in some of her writing was that she couldn't relate to her subject, and it made her so anxious and insane that she took her own life. Like
I believe it. Yeah. I think this is at the heart of why shamanism, the shaman's never going to be able to stay in the village. He's going to have to live on the outskirts of town. And even that, there's just certain things that aren't going to work. This is why I don't really believe in the sovereign human as an ideal that's ever reachable. I think we're symbiotic is what we are, because if you can't, if you can't regulate off someone else's beliefs, it's not that it's impossible. I just think it just takes so many more calories, and no one else has enough patience for that. I think that's really what it is, because you're going to have to wait for them. See, I have weird ideas. I think that walking is a faith-based activity. And I say this because I've just looked at these stories of people that were isolated from society, and for whatever reason, none of them could walk. It's like, well, why? Why is this a thing? And if you think about how important it is to regulate off each other, I can't prove that walking thing, but I think this is a viable theory, is that if you cannot regulate off other people, most of your faith-based activities are just simply not going to be possible, because you're not going to be able to find the torque that someone else believes in you. And this is what happens at a recital. This is what happens when you're running. The home team advantage is a bona fide real thing that exists in psychology, because you are tapping into the torque of people's belief that are around you. And because we are inklings, because we were younglings, maybe is a better word, we're still in this infantile state, we're going to need these training wheels, which come from each other. And that only eventually, as we become beyonders, the billionaire is alone a lot more, because the billionaire loses calories when they're around each other. Why? Because you're regulating to them. So every moment that you spend with the schizophrenic could be a black hole to them, meaning that all the energy you're putting in, it could be a black hole, but it would only feel like a black hole because it's so bottomless. It's going to take so many calories to fill that up. And that if you had enough time, you probably could, but the amount of time it's going to take probably is going to go back into this past lives I was telling you about earlier. where just it seems like all that's fixable, but you would just need to be able to witness them for maybe 4 generations, right? Because 4 generations ago, somebody had a horrible experience that, remember this is what I said about vitriol earlier, that they were not able to alchemize. I didn't say it's a hard, you have to be able to alchemize it. You have to be able to, yeah, I was trapped in a cave, gnawed off my own arm, and now I'm better for it. You know, versus the guy that's like, I was trapped in a cave and I gnawed off my own arm and now I'm going to eat you. Like the same experience, different alchemy, right? So how much torque can you pull from all of your tragedy, from all of your strife, right? To me, this is really what we're doing. And if you look back at what would be required for Osiris to remember himself, it would take some of the most advanced torque we could ever find. We would have to believe that we could tap into the raw power of silicon itself to create an artificial intelligence that could create the chemical thermodynamics to create the world exactly as it is right now. Even the tumbleweed that just blew by, that the amount of advancement that would be needed for that would require us to believe in something that doesn't even exist yet. So we believe in computers before they're there. We just call it God, right? We believe in medicine. We believe in the power of healing before it's there. We just call it God. So Oracle, I use this term a lot, but the Oracle mythology is a real life thing. We can see the truth of our past by looking at where we're questing, where our fears are, where our fetishes are. That's why fetish is such an important word, is because the more honest we can be about our own fetishes, and we hide our fetishes, the harder it's going to be for us to track the real trajectory of what the world looks like.
So it's really comes down to having these experiences, and I like you bring in like a past life experience from the DNA, from that information that's locked up in our cells that we can actually utilize. I mean, if we're conscious of it, right now we can utilize, and in your words, alchemize that. And it's the alchemy that kind of turns that into the magic that we get to grow inside of us to learn more, to render more, and to open that aperture. So I think that's the whole thing in the corporation is like so many people, to kind of end this off,
How do you wrap this up?
hate their corporate jobs. And what you're saying is like, you might be in the exact place you need to be. You're thinking about it all wrong. And you're not utilizing the experience for what it could really be in your growth. You're just trying to get out, and you're not even taking that experience as something that is beneficial to you. When, if you can do it in the moment and start alchemizing while you're going through the experience in a more present or conscious way, it could be a completely different experience. And it sounded to me like, maybe we'll end with this. You can tell me if that's correct. It sounded like that would be one of the most helpful things within the corporate world, is to alchemize that. And even if you're not speaking up and telling other people what it is you're doing, by simply giving off that energy and those calories and that information that others are picking up, at some point with enough people doing that, things change.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I'll just say that a lot of us seem to measure whether an action was good or not over how much pain we experience right after that. And that requires you to have a longer term view of consciousness. If you change your posture tomorrow and you go back into your work and you're there to have a dilating experience while you're there, you're just there to feel fulfilled every moment, in the elevator, in the parking lot, at the water cooler, before the meeting starts. Every opportunity is an opportunity to breathe more, to breathe deeper, to have a deeper experience. One of two things is going to happen, and there's nothing you can do to change it. If you keep doing that, you're either going to be fired or you're going to be promoted. And that both of those are exactly the right decision. Neither one of those is better or worse than the other. It's you're tracking the progress, and the only thing that you have to prove that you have progress is your emotional timber. So you will feel dissatisfied because you've advanced. Elevation looks like dissatisfaction. I am no longer satisfied working at Hardee's at 5 a.m. I want something else. And I only did that because I gained enough self-worth to say, hey, I can hate this now. Oh my God, I freaking hate this. This is progress. And when we alchemize those, because our first reaction is to say, oh, this feeling I must hate. And this is what happens when you first turn on your hearing aid. You hear things like that and you think instantly, this must be a problem. And no, it's not. It's everything you need. The sound is going to be your joy. You just have to trust more. You have to put more calories into that experience and how important you are in this world. You are the most important cell in this entire world. And you've been taught the entire time that it doesn't work that way, but it does. No one was here before you got here. No one will be here after you die. It's all an illusion, man. So embrace this that you have now. So yeah, I think we're on the same page. I'll just stop talking now.
Good.
So we're going to end it right there because I think that was really good advice. If people can wrap their minds around that and take that vitriol from trying to incorporate all these lofty ideas and alchemize them to your own corporate magic. So James, thank you so much.
Thank you, James. That was absolutely mesmerizing. And
It was like
I
our
really
own-
enjoyed it. Yeah.
It was our own personal James True like breakdown. It was great.
Well, best of luck. Anything I can do to help you guys. I think your message is important. So yeah, maybe we can do this again. So thank you.